I think we're on, Gideon.
You're on. Hi, Stu.
Hi, Gideon. So welcome everyone, or everyone that's not there but might watch later. My name's Stuart Smith, and I'm talking to the wonderful Gideon Mendel with a full head of hair. How old are you now, Gideon?
I am very shortly going to be 64.
So does that mean you've already got your free bus pass?
I do. I have my free bus pass.
You see, look at that full head of hair. I'm so envious. I can't even begin to tell you. And it's only slightly going grey, isn't it?
There's a good amount of grey.
Yes, I know, but look at it. It's like a proper hair. Right. Well, Gideon, let's crack on. We're going to talk today about your climate change work, and the reason I'm talking to Gideon is that we're going to produce a book, which we're going to do. So I think I'm best placed because I've looked at your work over. How long have you been doing this, Gideon?
I've been working on this project on my initially Drowning World and more recently Burning World since 2007. So it's kind of going on for 15 years.
15 years. And I've probably been involved for almost all of that. And to me, it feels like nearly 20. So,
yeah. I mean, it kind of feels like a lifetime, doesn't it? A long, painful lifetime.
and a half. So,
no, but truthfully, Stu, I think along the way, showing the work to you kind of repeatedly as it's progressed, as the different narrative elements have developed, has been a huge help. And I think you've been a consistent sort of voice in my head and the voice, going through this project, telling me to be more rigorous, telling me to be more precise, and helping to kind of, in a way, define and kind of see what I'm doing and kind of establish the different threads and the different kind of streams in the project.
Well, let's start having a look at start showing your slides, Gideon, because we can talk over them and talk about that. Because I think initially when you started doing the pictures, you started perhaps from a documentary angle. Yeah. And although you did these portraits, you were doing quite a few other things. But with the documentary, so talk us through this one, because I do love this one, Gideon.
You can see me over here in Florida in 2016, photographing Terrence McGee and his mother at their flooded home. I mean, that was quite an amazing situation. I traveled on a boat with them to their flooded house. And you can see Terrence was quite a tough guy. Well, he came across like that. But I kind of was filming him as they went into their flooded house, and he just burst into tears. And his mother was sitting in the boat and he was wading around in the water. And I was, taking a photograph of him in front of this. In fact, that was a garage where he was living at the time. I began to kind of photograph him. And his mother actually said that she wanted to be in the photograph as well. She was over 70, but she came into the water to be photographed because she felt that she wanted to be part of it too. I can actually I can zoom a bit forward and find the picture of them. Yeah, there they are. That's the actual picture I was taking.
And did the water ever go over your waders?
Yeah, I've had all kinds of events. I've been, on some occasion, getting to Florence Abrams' house in Nigeria with my kind of cameras, my assistant had the camera bag over his head. I had my video camera in my hand, but the water was so deep and a lot of it went into my waders. I've fallen into ditches and, had my waders full up with water. I've had my adventures. I've destroyed some cameras on the way as well. I've done, since 2007, I've done 20 different trips to different floods in 13 different countries. So it's been quite a journey. And I mean, that's a picture I took in Brazil in 2015 in Rio Branco. And as you'll see later on, I have a kind of obsession with this project with doors and windows. And I've photographed a lot of flood doors and windows. And I was actually photographing this door. And the owner of the house kind of came along and asked what I was doing and then wanted to be in the photograph. And in Rio Branco, that point, it's a place which is regularly flooded, but with the river Acre was at its highest level ever recorded. And even though the house was built on stilts, the water had been above roof level. So he was standing on a little platform outside the house, but because it was on stilts, I had to photograph from a boat. I don't like doing that. I like to have the precision of having a tripod in the water. But that's one of the few pictures actually shot from a boat.
Gideon, I'm just, there's a guy that helps us do this thing, and something came up on my screen, I pressed it, and now I don't see any pictures from you, and I don't know why. All I've got is the word Zoom, which I think is the program that we're using, but I don't see any pictures, or I can't see your screen. I don't know if I've lost it, which is unusual for me because I'm technically very proficient.
Could you ask him to help? Should I stop screen sharing for a second?
Yeah, just see if you can, and then do it again. But at the moment, I'm not seeing anything, Gideon. I don't know why.
If there are any audience members out there, could you maybe just drop a message to confirm?
Which I can't read because I've not got the thing that's working.
Oh, Stu.
Try it again, Gideon.
It's okay. So
just quickly show it again. Just share your screen.
I see it's working fine from that side. I'm sharing my screen.
Yes, we're back.
You're back. Okay.
Okay, so we're back. Sorry.
Do you want me to go back? Continue?
No, you're good. You're good. You just keep moving on.
I think that the thing that you helped me kind of clarify with this project, Stu, is that I was basically developing different kinds of narrative threads. And this series you're seeing now is a sequence from my Drowning World project, which I call Submerged Portraits. And I mean, I think this is probably the best known of my climate work. And it's a series of very kind of conventional portraits of people affected by flooding. What's kind of extreme and crazy is the context. People are engaging the camera directly. And they sort of, I suppose, were a kind of departure from my previous work, which was more conventional photojournalism, because in these contexts, I'm not photographing people fleeing the flood. I'm not photographing people responding to the flood. They engage directly with me in kind of portraiture, which is kind of counterintuitive. But it's something which I sort of stumbled upon many years ago. And it's, the way I photographed has developed and changed over the years. And the cameras and the technology has of course affected it. But these images are made between 2007 and now. These last two are some of the most recent ones taken in Pakistan and that in Nigeria just a couple of months ago. And it's always a challenge to kind of organize these and find a sequence. And what I've found, and something which Stuart you've encouraged me to, is kind of arrange them in a sequence of kind of falling water level. I mean, I think for me and for others, this is perhaps one of my favorite pictures in the series. And it shows Florence Abram, who I met in Nigeria in 2012. She actually kind of, in my conversation and my interaction with her, something was really kind of crystallized in the process. When I was photographing at that time in Nigeria, I always get the advice from my local fixers about what sort of arrangement I need to set up with my kind of subjects. And it was Rodmus's suggestion that I have a kind of a small fee to cover people for their time and their involvement with the project. So I was paying my subjects $25 for being part of this. And I had spent a few hours with Florence. She'd taken me to a house, and she told me that she was a baker. She showed me her destroyed baking equipment, her mixing machines, her ovens, which were all destroyed by the flood, and in a situation where there's no culture of insurance in Nigeria. So she'd lost everything, and the 25 workers she had in a bakery had lost, had no work, and people who made their livings from taking her bread out on bicycles and sending it on had also, lost their source of income. So it gives a sense of what this kind of disaster was. And after spending a few hours getting to Florence's house through pretty high flood water and taking her portraits and interviewing her, when we were leaving, I tried to give her the $25, which I thought was what the transaction was. And she said to me, you know, I'm really sorry. I don't want to be insulting, but I don't want to take your money. But I just want you to show the world what's happened to me. And I think that really crystallized for me, is that what I was offering my subjects is a kind of deep witnessing. I'm not in a position to help them. I'm not an organization. I'm not an NGO. All I really am is a witnesser, and that's something which I try to do in the best possible way. So moving through.
So I think what you started doing, Gideon, when you were doing the portraits was making the people, positioning the people more centrally and getting this unified sort of, they could be further away or they could be closer, but it was getting them centered in the frame so that your gaze and the people in the middle. And that's the bit that might have changed, because before sometimes you were trying to frame it differently or you were trying to position them. Now and which also, when you're taking pictures, makes it a lot simpler for you.
Yeah, so it's generally a kind of a very kind of centralized frame, people at the center. And I'll come back later in relation to the firework to show how the kind of how it's changed in some ways. So the next like narrative thread I'm going to talk about is something which I call flood lines. And that's just really a series of images of the line of floodwater as it moves through personal spaces and more public spaces. And again, I mean, I often think of these two pictures because this picture was taken in 2007 at on my very first day of photographing a flood, and this one was taken in Nigeria. So you can just see, so one was taken 15 years ago, and one was taken just a few months ago. And I really think there's almost a kind of interior-exterior unity in these two images as a diptych. Of course, when I first began, I was working on film on Rolleiflex cameras. More recently, I've been working on a Fuji GFX camera. And I think the cameras you use also do influence the way you photograph a lot. So showing you some more of these. And this is just the kind of intrusive presence of the floodwater which always bisects the image. And that's just some of the aftermath. And then the other narrative, which has developed over the years and is a kind of archival project where I've built up an archive. I've collected more than 2,000 images which are not my images, the images which are from individuals, from communities that have been flooded. And it's kind of in a very different way, we see the impact of floodwater on photographic emulsions of different sorts. And some of these are from individuals who I've photographed and are very particular. For example, Shirley Armitage, who don't have here, who is one of the people I photographed in Somerset, and she described this image as her. She's one of the people I photographed, but also she described this image as one which showed her third failed marriage. And I think just the poignancy of what the loss of these images means for communal memory. And you can see just very different kinds of, some are very linked to individuals. Some like this was a passport photograph, which was just floated past me in the water in Srinagar in Kashmir. So some are completely anonymous, and some are very, very tied to individual stories and individual people who I encountered. At the floods in Germany in 2021, I met a remarkable woman called Gisela Piers Marx, who had been flooded. She was quite elderly, and she'd spent 13 hours standing on a ladder in her kitchen as the floodwater rose and receded around her. And she had an amazing family story and a huge family archive, which was destroyed by the floods. I helped her recover what she could, and these were some of her images from her family history, and her personal and her family history. And kind of interviewing her, I sort of realized there was a remarkable story being told in these images. And I kind of, for a few different exhibitions in Germany, I built this installation of her images, separating the older black and white ones, which were kind of from her family history, from the more recent color ones. And they just tell the story of her life. Very sadly, she passed away a couple of weeks ago. I was still in touch with her. And, you know, she really, I think the images tell the story of her life and her family story in Germany, which is a long and quite amazing tale. Stu, should we move on to, oh, actually I can show you just the installation of the exhibition. That's how it's combined with a blow up of one of her flood damage negatives. So that's the physical installation of her photographs on show at a gallery in Germany. Moving on to fire. Stu, do you have anything to say before we progress?
No, I had a frog in my throat. No, what I probably would say was, you know, I've never liked the title Drowning World, Gideon, and you know, although it's for me it's just too much of a thing, which just sounds too obvious but a bit corny. But already it's moved on to something else. In the same way that the book that we talk about that we're going to do, when you started doing fire and then you started doing these installations, the book itself suddenly is taking on a completely different feeling and becomes a much broader subject when you're looking at flood and fire. And then at the moment, I guess we're calling it flood and fire, but the fact that you introducing the same thing of within the fire of fire damage and portraits, but shooting them differently, it's suddenly this project from the 15 years or or however long the flood is suddenly changed. And I think it's lifted it, because we also talked about at one point you wanted to put activist pictures in and pictures of your pictures being used in protest, and it always felt separate to the book. And it wasn't that we couldn't put it in, but the question was how could we make it work. But again, this is still a question for us, Gideon, but I think that when you introduce the fire and the way that you photograph the things that you're going to talk about next, it changes everything. So you've got many different strands within what we're doing now, which will ultimately move the book and move it on to the next level of how you talk about and what you talk about with climate change.
Yeah. So what I'm showing you here are a few of the portraits I've done of people who've lost their homes, or in this case, his church to fire. Photographing the aftermath of fire is very different to flooding. As you can see, it's a much more kind of chaotic environment. And the kind of difference between a flood picture and a fire picture is, in a way, quite dramatic in terms of the circumstance, in that in a flood, you have a flat plane of water in front of you, which makes it much easier to photograph. With a fire, it's a very chaotic environment. And what I sort of worked out is that in order to make these flood portraits work, I had to be very, very precise. The composition had to be extremely precise. I figured out how to position people, position their heads. There's so many lines going in all different directions. The kind of precision became the way to make these work. And so this is something which I kind of built up and developed. And I sort of, between really 2020 and the start of last year, I focused on fires and kind of developed this method of photographing. When last year, from September, through September through to and November, I went back to floods, both in Pakistan and Nigeria, I kind of brought that kind of style of composition into my flood work. So if you kind of look at some of these more recent pictures, the compositional approach is very influenced by what I kind of worked and developed in my fire photographs. Sorry, does that make sense to you, Stu? Or is it confusing?
Yeah, absolutely.
Um,
I mean, what you can see is you're further back and you're allowing more space around, which is obviously what you've done in the fire.
yeah.
And
So
it helps your portraits from the flood because it gives that range and that diversity. And I think some of your best pictures have come from your last visit, to be truthful.
Yeah, no, I think some of the the most recent pictures. So I think also the kind of tools you use as a photographer kind of affect you. You know, sort of, for example, these are shot on a Rolleiflex camera, working on film, and some of the, the more recent ones are shot. You know, let's give some examples. Are shot on are shot digitally on a very high quality GFX 100 camera. So I think we definitely, the tools definitely affect the way that you work.
And why is it that you didn't shoot square for the portraits of the fire, Gideon?
I felt I wanted to do something different, and I think because I thought the firework was going to be much more about landscape. I think the 5:4 format is much more effective for photographing landscapes than, well, maybe it just I thought it would make life easier for myself, having a different format. But I didn't really think of how that would make kind of exhibiting the work and publishing it together harder, because you've got different kinds of shapes. I think when we come to the book, it would have been much easier for you if everything had been square, or am I wrong?
Yes and no, because we'd be looking at them in two different sections. So I would never put the flood and the fire portraits together, because I think it was too complicated. And plus, we've always got this idea that the flood lines are going to recede. They'll start up high and go down to people's feet. And there's a natural simplicity about it. Whereas I think you're right. I think if you had done these square, you're missing this landscape that's going on behind.
Yeah.
And often that landscape, because the fire is all consuming and the flood may or may not be, but I can see why you did it. And I don't think it's, ordinarily I might say you should have done it square, but in this instance, I think they're two different projects and you've approached them differently. And I think, or with your format, and I think that's fine.
So these are just some of the, I call this scorched topographies, and it's, a sense of the kind of impact of fire on landscape. And this is a very particular kind of thing I did. When I photographed the fire, the aftermath of the fire on the Greek island of Evia, I was very struck by the landscape and the impact and the kind of devastation done to the landscape on the island. And it kind of prompted me to return. I went back, so I've actually made two subsequent trips. The first trip was in August 2021, and shortly after the fires. And I went back in February last year, and then again in June last year. So I did 3 trips to the island, and partly just to track the kind of changing landscape after a fire. And the image on the right here, on one level, might seem kind of hopeful because you see a return of green. But in actual fact, the olive grove you see is completely destroyed. The trees are due to be removed soon. And the forest in the background is dead and destroyed as well. So we have the return of kind of grass, but there's substantial damage done to the landscape. And on the island, there are a few hundred families who made their living drawing, the sap from pine trees to make the Greek wine Retsina, which has that pine kind of taste. And they've all lost their source of income from the destruction of the forests. So it's had a huge impact on the island and the community, and an impact that's going to be felt for generations. And again, I suppose it was a kind of photographic challenge to kind of, I suppose, to be as precise as this with the 2 different landscapes. But that's something which I kind of, maybe I have a slightly kind of spectrumish desire for kind of precision in lots of areas, which might surprise you, Stu, because I'm not the most.
No, oddly, it doesn't, Gideon. I think most photographers, to be truthful, have a sort of a singular focus which they have to have, which makes them on the one hand very good at what they do, but on the other hand socially difficult. But I'm only joking, Gideon. But I think that you have to have that singular.
I've lost you, Stu. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Stu?
I am here, Gideon.
Okay, so I stopped sharing.
Yeah. So no, I think all photographers have this singular focus, and they have to have. Otherwise, they won't do what they do, and they won't do it properly. You've got to be able to switch off everything around. So the very fact that you're doing this, the only problem for me is, of course, that you're creating a new topology, which is quite difficult to put in the book in a sense of how we make it work again. So I'm thinking about it slightly differently from you. I'm just saying, is there a way that this works in a book? And that's what I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
Because you haven't done this. Have you done this elsewhere?
Not as I've attempted it, not as successfully.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes, I don't know if these two work in a similar kind of way, but probably not.
Yes and no. But again, what you're doing here is very interesting, this man-made objects that are sort of like you did with your floodlines, but of course this is completely different. But this idea that we recognize that plastic chair, or the melting of just that, is it a portal loop? But it's quite interesting about the fire damage. And of course, the fires that you've been photographing, where were they? What countries were you in for those, Gideon?
So I photographed fires in Australia in 2021 and Greece Australia in 2020, 2021 in Greece and Canada and the USA, and last year 2022 in Colorado. So it's a much smaller set of countries, but I think I felt that I needed to do a lot of work on fire to sort of try and build up the dialogue and the kind of conversation between flood and fire in my work. And I think it is significant in a way that, in a similar way, a variety of narrative threads have emerged through the work. With the portraiture being the kind of spine and the central line through the work, the other kind of narrative elements, perhaps not as kind of clearly defined, the fire, as they are with the flood work.
No, I think the fire and these details, they are slightly more complicated because the flood lines that you've been doing, your details, and you must also say that you didn't just do flood lines. You did a lot of pictures around flood that didn't have portraits, but you fixed on that because that's the thing that worked. A lot of the other pictures ended up being, if you like, your more documentary style, and they looked like pictures that you might get in the newspaper just to record what's going on. And what you're trying to do, I think, you correct me if I'm wrong, you're trying to make something, a different way of expressing and showing something than just what we see. And when you have the fire, the results of these probably are a little more tricky for you to do because you have to work a little harder and it's not so straightforward because you've already worked out what you're doing with your floodline.
Yeah, so I think what kind of happened over the years, over 15 years of the work, is I initially combined doing these sort of portraits with doing work, quite documentary work as well, some conventional photographic documentary work. It was partly how I thought I might be able to sell that work, or it might be a way I could fund future work. But I think it soon became clear that it was just not nearly as strong as the more conceptual work. It wasn't working in the same way. And that also sort of coincided, that realization coincided with the development of my practice as a filmmaker. And the way it has evolved now is that whenever I'm, probably more than 50% of the time that I'm working in the field, I'm shooting video rather than stills. And all the kind of, I suppose, the more documentary situations, I'm not even attempting to capture photographically. I'm capturing them with video. And we'll perhaps talk in a few minutes about the kind of video work and my video practice. I'll just let's just get going.
Can you just quickly for me, Gideon, unshare and then put it back on again? My computer's done that wonderful thing.
Okay.
That's it. Now you can go back to it.
I can go back to. I have to see your
Yes.
face and your
My smiling face.
smiling face and your non-head of hair. Sorry to.
Yes.
Okay, so when I went to photograph in Greece in 2021, some people I met said I must go and see the nymph or the remains of the nymph, and the nymph is or was an ancient olive tree, apparently more than 2,500 years old. When it was still alive, 10 people would have to hold hands to be around the circumference. And I sort of witnessed this. I saw this tree, and it felt like a huge environmental, ecological, cultural sort of blow. To have something as significant as this destroyed by the fire. And I photographed the nymph, but it also kind of inspired me to photograph and find burnt olive trees. And there were probably hundreds of thousands of burnt olive trees across the island. So I felt it also needed a very different kind of way of photographing. And you can see these are very different to my conventional way of photographing. I'm shooting, kind of in portrait format. I'm shooting with my aperture wide open. There's no depth of field. And I'm choosing to shoot in black and white. Because I just felt these destroyed olive trees had an amazing sort of sculptural quality, which I felt black and white would somehow enhance and show. I call this series the Olive Tree Ghosts. And for me, there's something very eerie and ghost-like about the forms they create. And there are thousands of trees like this across the island. And these are just a few of them that I photographed. And it was part of my motivation to return on the 2 occasions I did to document more of these. And
when you went back, Gideon, did you take more pictures that were successful, or was it just your first trip where they were successful?
I think I took more successful pictures. I mean, I think the landscape had changed, and for example, you see that there's vegetation, whereas the earlier ones there's just no vegetation; it's completely stripped. So it's a changed landscape, but I think the forms still work. And I found more. I mean, I was talking to a gallerist about these, and she showed me some pictures of African Dogon sculptures, and some of them are very, very similar to a certain kind of style of kind of African sculpture.
When you're photographing the portraits of people in front of their burnt out houses, how are they when they talk to you about it? I mean, if you do people in floods, and with the floods in houses, often, obviously, the house hasn't been washed away. It may be up to the first floor, or up to the light switch. But I think I remember you saying that it's almost worse because the flood, with a fire, everything's gone, and if you're insured, it just meant you get everything back. But every single thing is gone. Whereas with the flood, it may be different. What have you got from the people you photographed?
Well, first. It's a very different kind of thing. And I think photographing, one common experience of people who've been flooded told me is that when the flood water is there, they're in almost a kind of dreamlike state. It's a really strange thing to be inside your home and to see reflections. And it's almost once the water's gone, the nightmare begins. And it's years and years often of kind of dealing with the flood, dealing with mold, dealing with repair. It's a complicated, it's an endless process. And some people who've been flooded have expressed jealousy for people who've lost their homes in fires, because it's a one-time thing, and then you just have to start to rebuild. But it really depends. Very few people are fully insured for fires, so it's always a huge loss. John Hammond over here, who I photographed in America, had no insurance at all, and he had lost almost everything. But I think I also have to, I think it is always quite an amazing process. And obviously with fires in a different kind of way, people are coming back to be photographed and coming back to a scene of quite extreme trauma. So it's always the communication with them and the contact with them is very important. And I think I need to, often when I interview people, it's the first time they've really spoken about what's happened. So I feel it's quite a huge responsibility to be kind of supporting people and to be kind of emotionally present for them in that situation, despite the fact that they're kind of relative strangers. So taking you through to the last series I'm going to show, I have a kind of archival impulse, and I have collected a variety of kind of burnt objects over the years, including a remarkable set of burnt Nikon cameras from a collector who had a huge collector in Colorado, who had this huge collection. And I think for photographers,
were they insured?
Hey,
were they insured?
I think like many, he was underinsured.
Yeah.
And he had, I mean, he said he did manage to, take his Leicas when he left the house. He had a Leica, but he lost many. I think he lost 16 Nikon cameras.
But this thing where you collect things, Gideon, this is not new, is it? You mentioned it, but you did the Project Zangle, and you collected a skip full of stuff, didn't you?
Yeah, I collected a lot of objects from the site of the so-called jungle camp in Calais. And kind of amazing, I collected them. I also photographed them forensically, though in a different way to this. And we did a book, which I'm very proud of. We did a book of that material. I also exhibited that work at the ARTCO Gallery, and we showed the actual objects as well in the gallery. And I thought I was going to have to throw them all away at the end of the exhibition, but actually it got the attention of a kind of a group of sort of young archaeologists who sort of consider themselves who ranged in the archaeology of the Nile. And in fact, all the thousands of objects I collected in the jungle camp are now being kind of cared for in the Museum of London Archaeology collection, and kind of being handled with white gloves and carefully archived. So it's a very strange process when things go from being a piece of discarded rubbish, being bulldozed and about to throw away, to being kind of carefully preserved archival objects. And it's the kind of transition, and the point of transition is often quite random.
Yeah.
So these are the cameras, and these are some other. This is a set of kind of filters, and various a few other objects that I've collected. A stop sign. That's a collection of marbles, glass marbles, and you can see just what I think one thing that these shows that all these communities who are photographed had been subject to some of the most extreme heats. The fires, these so-called mega fires, burnt at such high temperatures that it melted all kinds of glass. So that's, yeah.
I want actually for you to just show a bit of you've got 2 clips of video I wanted to show you, because I know you said you take, I might be a bit cynical, but you take film as well, because obviously the camera does both. And I often a little skeptical of photographers that do both, because I almost think that you are neither good at either. But your video, especially the one of the flood that you exhibit with 5 different screens, or 5 different viewpoints, but lining them through, I think it's done very simply, but it's a very effective way of showing something. So Gideon, show a little bit of that, because I think it's a wonderful.
So Stu, just before we go there, just in response to what you were saying about photographers trying to do both, for photographers who are listening, I think you're right. If you are at the same moment trying to shoot stills and video and juggling between the two and not quite sure which one is most important, I think that's often a disaster. But I think the important thing is to be committed to one as your priority in any given situation. You know, it's when you're trying to do both simultaneously and you don't do either as well as you could, where I think it can be problematic. This is a 5-channel video piece, which I first showed at the Kyoto Graffiti Festival in 2017. And it's, it puts together the different narrative elements we've spoken about. And, so it's essentially, for me, a story about going home, and it begins in quite...
See, what's great about this, Gideon, is you called it deluge, which is so much better than drowning world, you see. So already you're on the right line.
Oh, the beginning is very empty.
Oh, I can't hear you, Gideon. When you're playing the video, do you remember, like at the Photographer's Gallery, we can't hear.
Stu, what you can see is that it began very empty and quiet and very still.
Yeah.
And it's progressively getting busier and people are coming into it more. And it sort of builds up, I'll take you a bit further along. I don't often do the kind of trick of having all 5 screens doing the same thing, but that was the moment there when everybody was rowing. I'll take you forward in the whole. We see people, it gets very busy. It goes from night to day. And then we start to get closer to cars, and we start to get And again, once we're inside people's homes, again, it's very tentative and nervous at the start, and then it kind of gets busier and busier. inside the homes. And we sort of go towards a lot of activity happening in the homes. And it loops around to the start again.
Interesting, actually, Gideon. Just we had all the portraits, and we realised that all these the portraits of them standing were the same portraits that you photographed.
Yeah.
But actually, it was a film because there was slight movement and the water was slightly shimmering. But at some point, it was difficult to see. So I think you managed to do it quite well, Gideon, which is take a picture and at the same time do your film. So,
well, I mean, I think I always made sure I get the still first, and then, I mean, it is kind of a crazy thing to do. And at the point when I was shooting film, it was crazy because I would have my film cam in my Rolleiflex, and I'd shoot the road, and then I'd put on my digital camera and do both. And that, but working on a high-end digital camera more recently, it becomes much easier because it's the same device. But you have to think quite differently. It's still a different kind of process, but I always made that the priority.
And is there one you're doing with fire? Are you looking at the same thing, or is that you haven't done that?
I have. I mean, my show at the Photographers Gallery has a combination of the challenge when they commissioned that film, which is on show as part of my exhibition outside in the Soho Photographers Quarter. It's called Fire Flood, and the challenge was to put the flood and the fire video together and get them talking to each other. And so I do. I mean, obviously the portraiture is very different because you haven't got the kind of movement of the water and the reflection. So it's challenging in a different sort of way. Yeah. So I mean, I think it's an important thing to mention, seeing this as a Photo London presentation, is that a lot of the work that you've seen just now will be part of a solo booth that I'm doing with ARTCO Gallery. That's the German gallery who represent me. And we are doing a solo booth where will be a complete focus on my climate change work at Photo London. And I think the intention is to do quite an uncompromising presentation at such an important moment right now, historically, politically, in terms of climate change. And I think, I think that was our decision, just to really, really focus on that work in the strongest possible way. And so I think that's something which I'm working towards quite intensely at the moment.
We've talked about doing a book, and of course we've talked about it probably for the last 10 years, and every year you say, I'm done, and we're going to do this, we're going to do just the flood, it's going to be the floodlines, then it's going to be documentary. is it finished, Gideon, or is it, if something came up, does that mean one more, I just nipped to this other thing? Or are you saying that if it so happened that you went, maybe, but if not, we're now going to look at how to put this together?
I think I've got the material for, I think I do have enough.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not going to say, I think if it was easy to get, I mean, I think last year I did some pretty extreme trips. You know, my work in Nigeria and Pakistan were really hard, really tough. They were long trips. They were very complex to arrange, a lot of logistics, physically very difficult. And I'm getting older as well. I'm not, you know, as you mentioned earlier, I'm 64.
Yes.
And so I think, I'm not sure if I need to do that many more extreme, you know, such extreme trips. But, you know, if there was a flood in Surrey next week and it was accessible and I could get there, I wouldn't say no. But I don't think I did. I mean, we're going to have so much material to work through to do this book. We'll be losing so much good material. So I mean, I've been called a flood addict. You know, and always finding reasons to keep on going. So maybe it's time to
hang up your wellies.
Yeah, hang up my wellies, and you know, and also, you know, I have a lot of other things to do. I'm working on a project about my personal family archive and family history, which is very different and a very different kind of challenge. It's a much more internal kind of challenge. So I think the next big task to you is we've got to, I mean, this is going to be the most important book of my career.
Yes.
And I think it needs to be an epic book.
Yes.
Politically, socially.
I know, I agree, Gideon. I think that the trick is to, how do we, you know, stop you ruining it by trying to, you know, push in and put in too many other little bits and bobs that confuse the issue.
I think the challenge is, Stu, for you to like listen to the photographer, for you to not impose your will, but you know, we'll get there. I mean, just to stop us kind of bickering anymore, Stu.
Yes.
I had this kind of remarkable experience when I was photographing in Nigeria last year. I was doing a portrait of a young sociology student whose home was flooded, and I'd shot a portrait, and in fact, I was kind of moving on to photograph someone else, and I just heard her singing. She was singing a song to some friends, or to the other people who she was with, and and she'd sort of adapted a church song to be about the floods. And, you know, I just thought it would be amazing to redo the portrait with her singing, and she was totally up for that. And, you know, she really is an amazingly impressive character, and you'll see such a talented kind of performer. So I'm going to show you.
I thought you were going to say, she said, I think GOST do great books, but obviously
no.
no such thing.
She did this kind of performance. I'm going to share my screen again. And share a bit of Shipra's. I won't show it all to you, but this is. So.
There will be no more big flood, no more, no more, for many thousand years. No more, no more, for many thousand years. There will be no more big flood, no more, no more. For many thousand years there will be no more crying, no more, no more. For many thousand years. No more dying, no more sorrow. For many thousand years. No more natural disaster in our land for many thousand years. No more crying, no more suffering for many thousand years. We have suffered so much during the season. No more pain, there will be no more flood again. No more, no more, no more dying for many thousand years. There will be no more waters, no more, no more, no more losing of our properties for many thousand years. All our properties are gone. All our farms are gone. Nowhere to lay our heads. Lord, please help.
Yeah, something went wrong there, but I thought I would pause it there.
Well, that's probably a good point to pause it. But I mean, it was great. But what I wanted to also say was I did go to a talk you did at the Photographers Gallery with Mark Seeley. And what I thought was very interesting in that talk was Mark was talking about photography that is trying to say something and do something, you know, concerned photography, making a point. And, you know, it's a call to arms and action. We need to look at what's happening, you know, and I agree with him. I think there's a lot of things going on in the world that we can't ignore at the moment. And so the work that you're doing and what you're showing, I think is timely, obviously. But I also, and the fact that you even started it sort of in 2000, what did you say, 2007?
2007.
A bit like Prince Charles talking about, you know, the rainforests. It's way before it may have become a point that we're really looking at it now. But that's why I think it's important, and it's important that we do a good book and the right book, and that your work comes out and it's seen. Because I know you wanted it to be seen in a lot of schools and a lot of places, and you know, we wanted to create something which was easily accessible and not expensive. And I know you had this idea of how we make that work. I still don't know how to do that yet. But anyway, all I was saying was this idea that photography is a call to arms. And I think it's more so now than ever.
Yeah, I mean, I think often sort of people want to pigeonhole you as a photographer. You know, are you a journalist? Are you an artist? Are you an activist? I think this is, and I think what often confuses people about me is that I don't really fit easily into any category. You know, I mean, if anything, I kind of see a kind of triangle, and that, yeah, the work does fit very comfortably in the media. The work's often published, and it sits quite comfortably in newspapers and magazines. It's often also shown in galleries and museums and in a kind of art context. And in some ways, I'm kind of most proud of the fact that it's often been part of climate activism. You know, the images have been used in protests. And I have an impending thing, which I'm quite excited by, is that I've been chosen as the kind of artist that Greenpeace will be working with at Glastonbury. So we're going to be doing a big exhibition of my works in the Greenpeace field at Glastonbury. So I think I might earn a bit of credibility with my kids with that.
Oh, I'm not sure about that. But hopefully it's going to rain, Gideon, then you can get a few pictures that'll fit into your remit there.
You were flooded. But, you know, I think the work is made to be seen and used. I mean, I've often used this term of kind of creating tools of visual activism, you know, and creating tools which can, I don't know, it's very hard. I mean, I don't know who knows what impact photography can have, and can photography cause change? Can we do anything with our work? But, you know, I think we can be, I think as, you know, as Ben Smith has called his series of podcasts, you know, it's a small voice. But
sure.
Something.
But as McMurphy said in One Flew of the Cuckoo's Nest, you know, at least you tried. And that's the key part, I think. And if we all try, then something can be done. I think if we all just give up, we're at a loss. And that's where I think, again, this call to arms is important. This thing that we acknowledge what's going on. Yeah.
I don't know if any audience people have any other questions, please drop it. We can go on. I think we're due to finish in a minute, but we could carry on if there are any questions.
No, I don't have any questions. I've got a question here, which is how to make a soft-boiled egg. When you open it, it doesn't. But it's. I think they're on the wrong webinar. But if by the way, that's 3.5 minutes from boiling. But so
I'm sorry, I disagree. I think it's got to be more than 4. You know, otherwise you get the transparent bit. It's
yes, no, and that's why I can't eat those types of eggs, because that transparent bit. Anyway, Gideon, I think we've come to our time. It's up to 7 o'clock. We've given an hour. We've hopefully people have had enough, so I think we can sign off now and go and have a nice glass of water and a glass of sparkling water.
Finish my green tea.
Yes. All right, Gideon. Thanks very much. It's been a pleasure as always. I look forward to seeing you at our house.
Thank you, Stu. Thanks for giving me you could have given me a harder time. You know?
I know. I will when I see you in person. I just didn't want to come across as a bit of a git.
You were amazingly positive and supportive and encouraging.
I know. Too nice. All right, Gideon. Well done, mate.
Okay, thanks.
See you later. Bye-bye.